What kind of preparations does a legend make for his own passing? The world hadn't yet recovered from the shock when Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness, took his final breath on July 22, 2025, after a long and merciless battle with illness. It seemed Ozzy sensed the end was near. In the days leading up to his death, he confided in those closest to him, most heartbreakingly, Tony Iommi, his lifelong brother-in-arms, revealing truths that shattered even the strongest hearts. And in a moment that now feels almost prophetic, Ozzy had stepped into the spotlight one last time, not just to perform, but to say goodbye. On July 5, 2025, beneath the skies of Villa Park Stadium in Birmingham, he performed his final concert, not standing, for he no longer could, but seated atop a custom-made winged leather throne, a powerful and haunting image of a man refusing to surrender the stage, the music, or the fans who had walked with him through decades of chaos, creation, and pain. That throne became more than a seat, it became a monument to endurance. Over 45,000 fans gathered in the stadium while nearly 6 million more watched worldwide. Though many thought they were witnessing a celebration or a triumphant homecoming, they were, in truth, witnessing the curtain fall. The show, titled Back to the Beginning, was a tribute to Birmingham, the city where Black Sabbath was born, where Ozzy and Tony first dreamed beyond the factory walls and soot-stained skies. That night, the original Sabbath lineup reunited after 2 decades apart, their music raw and stripped of theatrics. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a farewell. Joined by Metallica, Slayer, Guns N' Roses, Tool, and Pantera, Ozzy bled through every note. Those closest to him saw what fans couldn't, he was barely holding on. Tony Iommi would later say, "We think he held out just to do that show." Ozzy had said he'd rather die singing in Birmingham than rot in a hospital bed, and he meant it. After the show, there was no celebration, only a quiet moment, as Ozzy, wheeled into Tony's dressing room, cracked a smile and asked, "It went all right, didn't it?" Those words, humble and tired, carried more than any encore. No one yet knew what he would whisper to Tony in private, words that would surface only after the silence fell. On the night of July 21, Ozzy Osbourne passed peacefully in his sleep at home in Buckinghamshire, surrounded by Sharon and their children. The world awoke to heartbreak. Fans lit candles outside his childhood home in Aston. Tributes poured in from across the music world, from Elton John to James Hetfield, but none spoke louder than the silence that followed, filled with all Ozzy had given. The concert had raised €140 million for Parkinson's research in Birmingham Children's Hospital, but its truest legacy wasn't financial. It was human. A man nearly broken by time and disease had raised his hand in farewell, not on his feet, but in spirit. As Paranoid played for the final time and the stage lights dimmed, there were no fireworks, just the tremble of Ozzy's hand, Tony's tear-filled eyes, and the collective breath of a crowd who knew they were watching the end of something eternal. And then came Tony Iommi's revelation, just hours later, when he spoke through grief on ITV News. His voice, once commanding stages, now trembled with loss. Ozzy had sent him a final message the night before, "I'm really tired. No energy left." Tony knew then what he hadn't wanted to believe. Looking back, it was clear Ozzy had been planning this goodbye all along, not as a spectacle, but as a final thank you to his fans, in the place where it all began. No farewell tour, no flashy exit, just one last performance in Birmingham. It wasn't for headlines, it was for the people who had walked with him from the beginning. Tony's voice cracked as he said, he never said it was the last, but you could feel it. For him, the loss wasn't just of a bandmate, it was of a brother. Ozzy was the voice to his riffs, the chaos to his calm, the madness to his order. Their bond had been forged not in contracts or fame, but in the working-class streets of Aston, in schoolyard mischief and childhood dreams. They first met at Burfield Road School in the 1960s. Ozzy, loud and funny, struggling with school but brimming with charisma, Tony, quiet and thoughtful, already carrying the weight of the world. Though opposites, they shared poverty, dreams, and a longing to escape the factories that loomed over their future. Over time, their connection deepened, their paths crossing after school, in alleyways, on walks home, and eventually through music. Before they became legends, they were simply two boys from Birmingham, one who made people laugh, and one who dreamed in silence. That bond endured through every twist of fame and madness. And when Tony mourned him, he didn't mourn just the legend, he mourned the boy who joked backstage, the friend who never stopped being Ozzy. In the early 1970s, out of Birmingham's industrial decay, they created something that would shake the world, Black Sabbath. Their debut album in 1970, filled with thunder, church bells, and darkness, was the birth of heavy metal, a sound that demanded to be heard. Ozzy's eerie vocals and Iommi's sinister guitar riffs captured a generation's anxiety. Paranoid followed quickly, with Iron Man, War Pigs, and Paranoid itself becoming anthems of rebellion. These songs weren't just music, they were lifelines. As their fame soared, they evolved. Albums like Master of Reality, Volume 4, and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath showed a band pushing its limits. Iommi played through pain, literally, while Ozzy gave voice to a world unraveling. And now, decades later, Ozzy Osbourne's final performance didn't end with a bang, but with a whisper. His goodbye wasn't grand, it was human. And that's what made it unforgettable. In the silence he leaves behind, his legend only grows louder. After losing the tips of his fingers in an industrial accident, Tony Iommi didn't stop, he adapted, fashioning prosthetics and creating a heavier, darker guitar tone that would become the signature sound of Black Sabbath. Meanwhile, Ozzy Osbourne's lyrics turned inward, exploring the shadows of addiction, mental illness, and the crushing burden of fame, not glamorizing darkness, but surviving it. Through the 1970s, Black Sabbath became a juggernaut, selling out arenas worldwide and becoming one of rock history's most influential bands. But behind the screaming crowds and platinum records were endless tours, personal demons, and mounting pressure. Still, the bond between Ozzy and Tony remained unshakable. "What we created together was bigger than any one of us," Iommi once said, capturing the heart of a band whose music wasn't just sound, it was sanctuary for the misunderstood. Their songs weren't just hits, they were lifelines, and while critics initially dismissed them, history proved them wrong. Bands like Metallica, Slayer, and Iron Maiden would later cite Sabbath as the very reason they picked up instruments. By the decade's end, they had sold over 75 million records, becoming living proof that two boys from Aston, born into poverty under the smoke-stained skies of Birmingham, could change music by standing apart rather than fitting in. Yet the highs came with devastating lows. By the late 70s, Ozzy was spiraling, drowning in a storm of drugs, alcohol, and emotional chaos. In 1979, with Ozzy missing rehearsals and slipping further away, Tony made what he called the hardest decision of his life, he let Ozzy go. It wasn't anger, it was heartbreak. "We were watching him die slowly," Tony recalled, "and we didn't know how to save him." Black Sabbath continued with new voices like Ronnie James Dio and Ian Gillan, but the irreplaceable alchemy between Ozzy and Tony had been fractured. Ozzy's life tumbled into chaos, arrests, rehabs, near-death experiences. But somehow, from rock bottom, he clawed his way back. As a solo artist, he exploded with hits like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley, proving the Prince of Darkness still had fire in his soul. Yet beneath the success, something was missing: unfinished music between brothers. After decades of silence, in 2011, Ozzy and Tony reunited. Time hadn't killed the chemistry, it reignited it. They laughed, reminisced, and wrote, and in 2013 released 13, their first album together in 35 years. It topped charts worldwide, not just as a comeback, but as a declaration: time and age couldn't silence what they had built. Despite Bill Ward's absence, the essence of Sabbath lived on. Their farewell world tour, The End, wasn't nostalgia, it was healing, raw and unfiltered. Ozzy, older but unrelenting, stood beside Tony once more. The chords were slower, the screams more fragile, but the emotion, the brotherhood, was untouched. "It felt like home," Tony said. Every show radiated with that truth. It wasn't just music. It was memory, forgiveness, and fire. In those final years, they weren't chasing charts. They were telling their story, a story of brokenness and redemption, of finding each other again across the wreckage of fame. When they bowed for the final time, it wasn't just the end of a band. It was the triumphant closing of a lifelong journey. Tony didn't just get his bandmate back, he got his brother. And so, long before Ozzy's final breath, the healing had already begun. Then came July 22, 2025. Ozzy Osbourne died peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by family, leaving behind not just music, but a legend etched in the hearts of millions. As tributes flooded in, no voice carried more weight than Tony Iommi's. "There's never going to be another Ozzy," he said, not just with grief, but with reverence. He remembered the mischief, the backstage jokes, the childlike grin Ozzy wore even on the darkest days. He remembered the fall, the silence, and the impossible return. Most of all, he remembered Ozzy's final whisper, just days before the last show, "I'm not sure I'll survive this, mate. But if I'm going out, let it be singing in Birmingham, not rotting in a hospital bed." Tony couldn't respond then, but now those words haunt him more than any riff. That final concert back to the beginning wasn't a spectacle. It was a goodbye. No pyrotechnics, no illusions, just Ozzy, seated in his custom leather throne, giving every ounce of what was left. And when he wheeled off stage for the last time, it wasn't just a performance ending. It was a life completing its arc. For Tony, that night was closure, the final page in a saga written with riffs, pain, and love. Ozzy was never just the Prince of Darkness, he was the boy from Aston who dared to scream loud enough to escape fate. He was who he was, Tony said. No filter, no pretending. He lived hard, he loved deep, and he never apologized for being Ozzy. His legacy isn't just in his discography, it's in the courage he gave others to be flawed, loud, real. In hospital rooms, in bedrooms, in back alleys, Ozzy's voice became sanctuary. And that's what made him immortal. At his memorial, Tony stood tall, voice trembling but firm, and said, "This isn't goodbye. This is thank you." The silence that followed was deafening. Fans stood shoulder to shoulder, some sobbing, some smiling, all remembering not just the icon, but the man. Ozzy's echo lives in every riff, every lyric, every smirk mid-song. He didn't just change music, he bent history around his pain and turned it into power. Now, Tony walks forward carrying the silence Ozzy left behind, not hollow, but full of meaning. Because some goodbyes are so loud, they echo forever. If Ozzy's voice ever carried you through the dark, let it live on. Not just in the music, but in you. Because for those who truly listened, he never really left. There will never be another Ozzy.